Listen. Before you can see it, you can hear it. A low, grinding rotation. Wood against wood. Stone against grain. The whole building trembling slightly. Not from weakness, but from weight and purpose in motion. That sound is a mill running. And somewhere inside it, a man is listening too. He's listening the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. Not casually, not passively. He's tracking every variation, every skip, every subtle shift in the rhythm that might mean something is wearing or misaligned or about to fail. His name doesn't appear in many history books, so his trade doesn't get its own museum wing. But for more than 2 centuries across this country, the mill ran because of him. He was the millwright. The word itself has almost disappeared from everyday use. Wright is an old English term for a craftsman who builds. A wheelwright made wheels. A wainwright made wagons. A shipwright built ships. A millwright built and maintained mills. But the title understates the work considerably. A millwright was not one trade. He was 4 or 5 trades living inside one pair of hands. He understood timber framing well enough to construct a building designed to absorb enormous mechanical stress. He understood blacksmithing well enough to forge and fit the iron components his wooden gears required. He understood hydrology, the behavior of moving water, flow rates, seasonal variation, head pressure, well enough to design a system that extracted maximum power from a stream that might flood in spring and slow to a trickle in August. And he understood something harder to name, a feel for balance, for tolerance, for the relationship between weight and rotation and friction that no formula could fully capture. That knowledge lived in his hands before it lived anywhere else. If you grew up near a working mill, even a restored one, you may already understand what we're talking about. That particular combination of sounds, the creek or river, the wheel, the gears. It doesn't sound mechanical. It sounds almost alive. That was not an accident. The millwright made it that way. To understand the work, you have to understand what a mill actually was. At its simplest, a grist mill took the energy of falling or flowing water and transferred it through a mechanical system to turn a pair of heavy stone discs, the millstones, that ground grain into flour or meal. But simple is a misleading word here. The engineering involved was neither simple nor forgiving. The water wheel was the beginning. Depending on the site, the water's speed, its volume, the available drop, a millwright would design an overshot wheel, where water fell from above into buckets, an undershot wheel, where the current pushed against paddles from below, or a breast wheel, where water entered at roughly mid-height. Each design had different efficiency characteristics, so each required a different approach to the mill race, the channel that directed water to the wheel. The millwright surveyed the site. He calculated. He factored in seasonal change. He made decisions that would determine whether the mill was profitable for the next 50 years. Then he started building. The wooden gears alone would take weeks. Large hardwoods, oak, apple, hornbeam, were selected not just for size, but for grain density. The teeth of a gear, called cogs, were often made from applewood because it wore smoothly and could be replaced individually without scrapping the entire wheel. A millwright would cut each cog by hand, fit it into its mortise, and test the mesh against its mating gear before moving on to the next one. 40, 60, 80 cogs on a single gear wheel, each one shaped, each one fitted, each one tested. The goal was a gear train that transferred power without excessive vibration, without uneven loading, without the kind of slippage that would eventually shake a building apart. The tolerances involved were not crude. They were not close enough. A millwright balanced a millstone, a disc of granite that might weigh 1,000 pounds, to within thousandths of an inch of true level, using nothing more than a specialized staff, a keen eye, and experience accumulated over years. There were no instruments sophisticated enough to do that work for him. There was only judgment. Have you ever watched someone do something difficult and make it look effortless? That particular quality, where years of practice compress into a gesture so natural it seems casual. That's what millwright work looked like from the outside. Inside, it was anything but. Most millwrights served long apprenticeships. 7 years was not unusual. The first years were labor, hauling timber, tending fires, cleaning millstones, learning the names of every component before being trusted to touch them. A good master millwright taught slowly and deliberately. He didn't explain everything at once. He let the apprentice watch. He let repetition build the foundation before explanation was added on top. This was not inefficiency. This was how embodied knowledge transferred between generations. You can read about balancing a millstone. You can understand the concept in an afternoon. But the muscle memory, the slight adjustment of the hand, the reading of the staff's shadow, the moment you know it's right before any measurement confirms it, that took years to develop. You couldn't rush it and arrive at the same place. The apprentices who stayed understood that. The ones who left didn't want to wait. Wind-powered mills operated on related principles, but the engineering challenges shifted considerably. A windmill couldn't be sited wherever the miller wanted it. It needed consistent wind, unobstructed approach, and enough elevation to catch what the terrain offered. The millwright who built a windmill had to understand not just mechanics, but local geography, prevailing wind patterns, seasonal variation. The sails, or sweeps, had to be balanced against each other with the same precision applied to millstones. An imbalanced windmill didn't just run poorly. It shook. It stressed its own timbers. Left long enough, it could destroy itself. The Dutch had refined windmill engineering to a high art, and an American millwrights drew on that tradition while adapting it to different landscapes, different timber species, different wind patterns. The craft crossed the Atlantic and changed as it crossed. That kind of adaptation, taking foundational knowledge and reshaping it for new conditions, was itself a skill. A millwright who could only follow established plans wasn't as valuable as one who could read a new site and reason forward from principles. If there's a workshop in your town, any kind of workshop, you may recognize the culture we're describing. The tools older than the men using them. The silence that isn't empty but full of concentration. The particular relationship between a craftsman and the thing he's making, where neither one is entirely in charge. Tell us about it in the comments. Where are you watching from? By the early 20th century, the millwright's world was already changing. Steam power had reduced the industry's dependence on water and wind. Mills could be sited near population centers rather than rivers. The specific hydraulic knowledge that millwrights carried, reading watersheds, designing mill races, calculating head and flow, became less central to the work. Some millwrights adapted. Industrial facilities, factories, processing plants, needed men who understood large rotating machinery, power transmission, precision alignment. The title millwright persisted in these settings, though the work had evolved considerably. The millwrights who maintained water-powered and wind-powered mills found their customers disappearing. Not all at once. Rural electrification moved county by county through the 1930s and into the 1940s. Diesel engines became affordable and reliable. The case for maintaining a complex water-powered system, dependent on rainfall, on seasonal flow, on a trained specialist to keep it running, weakened with each passing year. By the 1950s, operating water-powered grist mills had become rare. Yet the men who knew how to build and service them were aging. Their apprentices had found other work. The knowledge didn't vanish overnight. It simply stopped being passed forward. There are people today working to preserve what remains. Historical sites have restored operating mills. A small number of craftsmen, some trained through formal programs, Others, self-taught from surviving documentation and old millwrights willing to talk, have learned enough to keep these structures functional. They are not numerous. The work is painstaking, and the materials are increasingly difficult to source. Millstones, true granite burrstones of the quality used in working mills, are no longer quarried for that purpose. Millwrights working on restoration projects often locate salvaged stone or adapt what's available. The large wooden gear wheels, if they need replacement, have to be recreated from scratch. That means finding craftsmen who can work at that scale, in that tradition, with those tolerances. It means consulting old drawings, old manuals, and the fading memories of anyone who still carries direct experience. It is possible, but it is not easy. And the number of people with that combination of knowledge, hydraulic engineering, timber framing, blacksmithing, precision millstone work, is not growing. Do you think skills like this should still be taught formally? Not as museum work, as living trade knowledge, passed through real apprenticeship. It's a real question, not rhetorical. What the millwright leaves behind is harder to catalog than most trades. A blacksmith leaves tools. A wheelwright leaves wheels. A millwright's work is embedded in a building, in the way the water reaches the wheel, in the angle of the mill race, yet in the mesh of gears that haven't needed adjustment in 40 years because they were fitted correctly the first time. His work is invisible when it's done right. That was not a complaint. That was the standard. A mill that ran quietly, consistently, and for decades without drama was a millwright's highest achievement. No one praised it. The mill just worked. The grain got ground. The farmer went home satisfied. And the millwright was already thinking about the next site, the next stone, the next season's water levels. The pride was private. It had to be. There is a particular kind of mastery that doesn't announce itself. Well, it doesn't need to. You see it in the way a man walks through a running mill, not inspecting exactly, just present. Listening with his feet as much as his ears. Feeling the vibration through the floor. Reading the building the way a sailor reads the sea. Knowing from long experience what normal feels like, so that anything different registers immediately. That relationship between a craftsman and his work, built over decades, refined past the point where it requires conscious thought, is what apprenticeship transferred and what documentation cannot fully replace. Maybe someone in your family worked at that level. A grandfather, an uncle, someone who knew a building or a machine the way most people know a familiar face. If so, you know what we mean. The mills still standing, the ones maintained, the ones restored, the ones that can still be coaxed into operation, are a record of what the millwright knew. Not a complete record, but enough to understand the scale of it. Enough to understand that the man who built a working mill was not simply a carpenter with a larger project. He was an engineer before the word carried a formal credential. And he was a physicist who had never taken a physics course. He was a diagnostician who listened to buildings the way doctors listen to bodies. He was the millwright. Skill lives in hands, and hands do not last forever. Under this video, there's a subscribe button. It's a small action, but it helps keep stories like this alive. If craftsmanship still matters to you, if you believe skill deserves to be remembered, subscribing simply means you want these trades documented while they're still here. And before you go, tell us where you're watching from. Is there still a working mill near you? A blacksmith? A shoe repair shop? A workshop that smells like oil and sawdust? Have you lived this life or watched it fade? Share your story in the comments. That's how these trades stay visible.